this seminar, Populism, Nationalisms and Identities. We'll have two presenters, Amit Singh and Cristiano Janola. Amit Singh is a PhD candidate in the doctoral program Human Rights in Contemporary Societies. Cristiano Janola is here in condition of PI of the research project UNpacking POPulism, comparing the formation of emotional narratives and their effects on political behavior. And we have a special discussant with us, which is Professor Boaventura, needs no introduction. He will, in the end, open the floor for debate and discussion. So I would call Amit Singh. He will be the first presenter. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. In this discussion, I will be talking about how Hindu nationalism took a populistic turn, employing Hindu religion in marginalizing Indian Muslim, at the same time excluding the possibility of resistance as well. So during my discussion, I would be covering these points. I will be talking about Hindu nationalism, Hindu populism, and populistic tendencies in Hindu nationalism, Hindu populism, and Islamophobia, and possibility of resistance against Hindutva. India got independence in 1947 from Britain. It turned out to be a secular state then. However, there were a bunch of people and the groups. They never wanted India to be a secular state. They wanted India to be a Hindu state because 80% population of India is Hindu and around 16% are Muslim. So one of such organization is called RSS, Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh. It is India's most staunch proponent of Hindu nationalism, and currently they are in the power, ruling India through its political front known as Bharatiya Janata Party with Narendra Modi as its Prime Minister. Before I proceed, I would like to explain what is Hindu nationalism or Hindutva. They both are the same. Hindutva is an ethnic form of nationalism, is radically far right, is authoritarian in nature. It means it seeks absolute loyalty to the nation without any question. It's based on a Hindu supremacism. It boasts its connection with Aryan theory. It negates racial and religious equality. It imposes uniformity through one single religion. It means a single religion of Hinduism, a single language of Hindi, and single culture of Hindu. That shall be for Indians. No other culture shall be regarded as well. Hindu nationalism is inherently anti-diversity and inherently anti-Muslim. It is intolerant to religious pluralism, secularism. It rejects non-violence. One of the cadre of RSS killed Mahatma Gandhi because he disliked Gandhi appreciating Hindu-Muslim friendship. And ultimately, their target is basically to turn India into a Hindu state just like Pakistan for Muslim. And this is what's happening at the moment in India. Scholars have argued that populists uses the divisive boundaries of us and them which religion provides them. Populists can exploit religion of majority population and exacerbate religious conflict, especially in the society where there is a historical precedent of animosity between two groups. In case of India, there has been a conflict between Hindu and Muslim in pre-colonial times. So Hindu nationalist leaders such as current Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been exploiting these religious conflict very well, effectively in fact. So Hindu populism is the use of Hindu nationalism and religion as a basis for populist politics. Also, Hindu nationalism as a populist discourse keeps religion in play, enhances religiosity by preserving religious identity. So, the proponent of Hindu populism always keep people angry. And this anger is directed towards Muslims, Christians, seculars, liberals, holding them accountable for why India is backward. All the problem happens because India is dominated by Muslim, by secular. So The follower of Hindu nationalists always keep people enraged, and a kind of emotions, very anti-Muslim emotions is always going on. So when these kind of a national narrative being propagated 24 hours through the national media and through the government propaganda channels, then it creates social distance between religious community, example Hindu and Muslim. What happening in India at the moment, there has been cases of a mob lynching on weekly basis, and Hindus are lost sentiment against Muslim. They have developed a kind of a naughty conscience. They are watching violence against Muslim being happened and they are not intervening. They have justified this violence on the basis that their culture is better than Muslim. Muslims are savage, therefore they need to be killed. Something similar happened during the Second World War in Germany. I borrowed this idea of Nazi conscience from Koch. So the emotional response of Hindu populists has been manifested in different kind of incidents against Muslims. One of them is Corona Jihad. Corona Jihad is the idea that Muslims are responsible for spreading Corona in India. And there is also called Love Jihad. It means Muslim youth lure Hindu women in order to marry them and convert their religion into Muslim. So India can be a Muslim state. Along with that, there has been cases of mob lynching of Muslims. Beef is banned in India. So if someone is found eating beef, he can be lynched. Many Muslims have been lynched because they have been blamed they were eating beef. And especially this kind of work is being done by the Hindu vigilante groups. In addition, there have been many cases of vandalizing mosques by Hindu groups. Apart from that, boycotting Muslim vegetables, vendors and sellers is becoming more regular cases. And there was a very interesting case of Bully by app. This is a software developed by a Hindu fanatic. It's a software which auctions Muslim women without knowing them. It was very controversial, but this happened last year actually. So we see some populistic tendencies in Hindutva discourse. Hindutva discourse believe only the Hindus are the real son of the soul. Muslims and Christians are excluded because their sacred land is not in India. Example, the Christians' sacred land is in Vatican and Muslim is Makkah and Medina. Also, Hindutva populism believe in homogenization of Hindu identity. It means those who are living in India, including Muslims and Christian, they are called Hindu. They cannot have their separate, distinct identity. So everyone in India who is living is Hindu. There is no other identity exists. There are other small identities like Dalits, there are Jain, there are Sikh, there are Baudh, but all these small identities are subsumed under the category of Hindutva. At the same time, appeal to Hindu aggressive cultural nationalism, it is one of the essential part of a Hindu populist. As I said, Hindu nationalists don't believe in non-violence. They are very violent against those who basically challenge them, and they promote a kind of very aggressive cultural nationalism, and this has been a cause of many violence against Muslims. Especially in some instances, Muslims were forced to chant the name of Hindu god. Also, Hindu populism is an anti-LCCism. It says the leader of BJP, RSS, and basically Narendra Modi, he says he represents ordinary people. And other parties, example Congress, which made India a secular state, Congress is a party of elite because it does not represent India, it represents few secular people. So there has been this idea that other parties are corrupt and they are very elite except this Hindutva party. And people also able to buy this idea actually because this has been propagated constantly through the social media. Hindu populism believe in nostalgia. They have a strong fascination towards ancient India. They believe in the greatness of old India. They believe that once India was a master of the world, master in science and technology. They have this fantasy of the kingdom of Lord Ram. And they believe there was a time when everything was perfect in Indian society and society was Society was perfectly peaceful because everything was following the traditional social order. What is the traditional social order? Hindu believe in a caste system. So those who are believing in caste system, it means untouchables has to follow except inferior position, just like the women does. And those who breach this traditional social norm are quite often met with violence, as we will see further. So since Narendra Modi came into power in 2014, he is also a cadre of RSS. And then Hindu nationalism took a little bit populistic turn. I must say Hindu nationalism and Hindu populism very much close to each other, but they are not the same concept. Modi has been regarded as an authoritarian populist. He has been effectively divided the population in two groups. Who is the people? So people is Hindu. They are oppressed by few elites, by few secular. Hindus are victimized because of the Muslim, because of the Congress elite. And Modi has been able to sell this majority idea to the people that India is a country of Hindu, therefore it must be a Hindu state. Modi is notorious for his anti-Muslim view. He is known as the butcher of Gujarat for his complicity in Godhra communal riots in 2002, where around 3,000 Muslims were massacred or killed when he was the chief minister of Gujarat. So Modi is already notorious for his anti-Muslim view. And since he came to the power, due to his populist call to Hindu nationalism, India's more than 200 million Muslims are victims of everyday Islamophobia and hate speech, which is being normalized constantly through social media and mainstream media. As you can see in this cartoon, after every riot, BJP, the Hindu Nationalist Party, gained in political terms. In 1984, they had just 2 seats out of 542 seats in national parliament. Now they have 302 seats. Because whenever there is an election, RSS, a Hindu fundamentalist group, through their vigilante group, they always organize some riots. And these riots basically mobilize people on the religious line. And Hindu tend to vote Hindu leaders actually. And this ultimately brought this Hindu nationalism into the power. The man holding the trophy basically represents the current Home Minister of India. He was a criminal once. So Narendra Modi, in his emotional speech, has been successfully generated a kind of an anxiety among Hindu population, holding Muslim responsible for everything from the population growth to the unemployment to the terrorism. And this narrative has been set using different kind of emotion of humiliation and pride. Hindu nationalists have been selectively picking up some certain event from the past of ancient Indian history. Example, they say Hindu were oppressed under the Islamic rule 500 years ago. And they also hold Muslim responsible for the partition of India in 1947. So these event has a 9/11 impact on Hindu population. So these leaders quite often mention these events, which basically mobilize Hindu population to vote for them. Apart from that, Hindu nationalist leaders also talking about restoring last glories of Hindu's kingdom. Example, building the temple which has been destroyed by the Islamic ruler 500 years ago. Example, temple in Kashi, Mathura, Ayodhya. There was a mosque in Ayodhya known as a Babri Mosque. It was demolished in 1992 by Hindu militant. Afterwards, there was riots and many of thousands of people died during because of this conflict between Hindu and Muslim. And now the next target is a mosque in Kashi. That is also Varanasi. Varanasi is a parliamentary constituent of current Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It's considered a sacred seat of Hinduism, and that is also my hometown. Apart from these strategies, Hindu government is also replacing the Muslim names with the Hindu name. Example, Faizabad become Ayodhya, as you can see Ayodhya. In addition, current government has been erasing the contribution of Muslim leaders, Muslim rulers in their Indian history. They are erasing their historical contribution, replacing their contribution with the fake history of Hindu nationalists. This is fact that RSS never participated in colonial struggle. In fact, they were opposed to Gandhi. So they have nothing very special to talk about, to boast about. So they are creating fake history, telling that they have done a lot for the Indian colonial struggle actually. So the past is very much present. Past hatred being channelized for the present benefits successfully by this populist government. Therefore, the constant labeling of Muslim as an enemy of the nation, invader, traitor has created an anti-Muslim environment in India, which has brought India on the brink of genocide. So in first of picture, we can see a Muslim man is being paraded through the street by Hindu vigilante, and he is being beaten by basically Hindu groups. Issue could be anything actually. It's a daily occurrence, it's not something exception. In other picture we can see Tabriz Ansari, he was killed because he was blamed he was eating beef. So Muslims were basically protesting against the mob lynching of this man in June 2009. Yesterday there was a lynching as well. And there is also economic boycott of Muslim. In first picture we can see a fruit of the Muslim vendor was basically destroyed by Hindu vigilante group. In other picture, we can see a Muslim bangle seller is being beaten by Hindu fundamentalist group. Usually, the bangle sellers are Muslim and the buyer are usually Hindu women. So, Muslim sellers are usually warned that they shall not sell their stuff to Hindu women. Also, there has been many assemblies organized by Hindu religious group calling for Muslim genocide in India. Government has been complicit. They are not taking any step. Such event is happening in Delhi, in Haridwar, and also Genocide Watch has predicted there might be a genocide in India in near future. Apart from that, as I said earlier, that Hindu nationalism believe in affirming traditional social role. So traditional social role means affirming the inferior position of Dalits and women. So those who try to breach this norm, they are being killed or they are being harassed by Hindu vigilante group. After BJP came to power, we can see the crime against Dalits and tribal has already increased. And Bollywood is also not contributing in Islamophobic narrative. In first picture, Kashmir File, in this film, Muslim has been portrayed as a terrorist. And it has been shown that because of the Muslim terrorists, Hindus become refugee in their own country, in Kashmir. In the next film, it's called Hum Do Hamare Bharat, it's in Hindi. It says Muslims are responsible for the population growth, and one family can have 12 children, one couple can have 12 children, and this way they are planning to overpopulate India and turning India into a Muslim state. In the last film, Padmavati, they generally depict Muslim ruler as an oppressive and forcing Hindu Rajput queen to marry them. This is another way to create a kind of resentment, emotional resentment against Muslim majority currently. In this peculiar case, 26 people were slapped charges just for praying inside their own home. These people, these Muslims, they are offering namaz inside their own home and police charged them because they are offering prayer at their own home. This was very surprising actually and ironic. And Gandhi is not even spared. Gandhi is hated by Hindu nationalists as he was killed by Hindu nationalists, because Gandhi was in favor of Hindu-Muslim brotherhood. And in first picture we can see the Lord, the goddess Durga is slaying the demon. And if you look at carefully, the demon is basically Mahatma Gandhi, a guy wearing a glass. There is a sunglasses you can see. So the demon is represented as a Mahatma Gandhi. So he is being slain. That's how people represent or talk about these days, some people. In other picture, a leader of a Hindu fundamentalist group is shooting a picture of Mahatma Gandhi on his death anniversary, showing their resentment against Mahatma Gandhi. And those who are resisting against such atrocities, they are treating as an enemy of the state. Example, in one of the picture we can see there is a banner and there are some photographs. These photographs of the Muslim who were resisting against Narendra Modi homophobic and anti-Muslim policies. So their picture was posted with their name and address. Some of their houses were bulldozed. So if anyone, not just a Muslim, if anyone, especially secular, communist, liberal, secular, they criticize government or Narendra Modi, they risk their life. In other picture, we can see the student being beaten by police. That's how police in India basically treat protester. They are resisting against one of the anti-Muslim law, which I'll talk further. So there is a resistance going on, and these are the open defiance. It means we can see in open. One of such resistance was in 2015, when around 15 riders returned their award to protest against the alleged growth in intolerance against Muslim under the Narendra Modi regime. These riders were infuriated because of the cases of the mob lynching. And those who were protesting against were termed as anti-national, anti-Hindu, and traitor. In another most important resistance against this government was a protest against, it's called anti-CAA protest, Citizenship Amendment Act. This act has a potential to exclude Muslims from citizenship. According to this act, anyone can seek shelter in India from the neighboring state except Muslim. So Muslims were denied asylum on the basis of their religion. Obviously, it was very discriminatory. So there was a huge protest against this act. And what was very important, a large number of women, Muslim women, participated. They were known as the heroes of the Shaheen Bagh. I will show the picture later on. Another very important protest, as we know, a farmer protest. It basically ran, it considered one of the world's largest demonstration and probably the biggest protest in human history by Times magazine. Farmers were protesting against a bill which bill was about contract farming. The bill has a possibility to losing their land to big corporates. So farmers were protesting for 1 year and ultimately the bill was withdrawn. Well, most of the bill these days is not passed through the debate in parliament. They are being passed through the judicial order. It means government institutions are being passed. There is no discussion. Also, we see there is a remarkable women's participation in the farmer protest. And these two events also show that Indian women, especially in the rural area, they are really capable to lead this movement. Apart from these resistance, there are resistance going on, but they are basically sporadic, inconsistent, and they are on ad hoc basis. And these resistance are coming from intellectuals, journalists, judges, ex-bureaucrats, students. They are writing letters to the government. Also, or the academics, basically they are organizing a free history class explaining the contribution of Muslim ruler to India and also trying to dispel the fake history promoted by Hindu nationalists. Also, feminist NGOs are also fighting against Hindu fundamentalism, Hindu patriarchy. There are underground student organizations, they are working against it actually, and it's happening at the moment. So in this picture, we can see these are the Muslim women of Shaheen Bagh. This was the first time in the India history when Muslim women participated in such a large number against this particular law. Unfortunately, anti-CAA protest was crushed in the pretext of controlling the COVID pandemic. But this shook the government of Narendra Modi. Under resistance which I observed, I interviewed these people in Varanasi. I call it invisible defiance. There were some underground student group. They don't have any name, but they are basically, they write graffiti on the university wall in the city. And they write against government, they write against Hindu fundamentalism, and they are very active, but they don't have any name. Somehow I was able to trace them, but they are basically vulnerable to arrest and police harassment. Another very important thing I have observed, although I did not interview them, other group, they are Hindutva supporter and they are turning against Hindutva. I couldn't interview them because if they know that I am a scholar, I might be in trouble. So I observed such conversation in private spaces, in public spaces. So example, one of the police official was talking about, he says that Modi and Amit Shah, the current Home Minister of India, he says people, they are dividing people using divide and rule policy like the British did, and they are weakening the country. And another officials are saying they are manipulating laws to frame the political opponent and student activists. This is what happening. Government, the constitution is being used against citizens. Law is being manipulated against those who are challenging government actually. So some officials, they are aware of it and they are starting opposing it. But these discussions are still within private spaces. It's just a matter of time when these resistant narrative move from margin to mainstream. Then we will see the real change. But at the moment, these are just going on actually. And another supporter of Hindutva, he said, why only 1% of India is making progress? As we know, currently the third richest person of world is an Indian, Gautam Adani. Most of the Indian company, government company has been sold to him. He is a friend of Narendra Modi. So people are aware of it. They are concerned about the poor economic situation. And they are also concerned about social political unrest. And they are getting restless about it actually. But they have been a very hardcore supporter of Hindutva. 2 years ago, it would not have been possible for these people to discuss these things, or no one can criticize Hindu nationalism in front of them. But now I can see things are happening. So this is a picture of farmer protest in Delhi. In this protest, basically farmer occupied one area of Delhi. They blocked the road for a year until unless they win. Of course, this law was repealed because of the election actually. And these are the women who are participating in farmer protest. Mostly these were the women whose relatives were killed during the protest. And these student groups, they are against the saffronization of universities at BHU, Banaras Hindu University in Varanasi. Saffronization is a process which is a mainstreaming of Hindu nationalism in the institution and structure, where the supporter of Hindu nationalist being appointed as a vice chancellor and secular and liberal scholars are being rejected or being expelled from the university. So in university you cannot talk about Hindu nationalism anymore. But there has been some protest, and this is pictured in 2018. You can see some people are still protesting. This is very interesting. I took this photo this year, and this is this event is called My Night, My Road. It's a women protest in Varanasi. Happened on 14th August. It's the middle of the night. Women came out together to fight against Hindu patriarchy, violence against women and transgender. This was surprising considering the unsafe situation, especially the night in India. These women came out, mostly university students, and they organized this event every year on 14th August. So it also happened this year, and they are very active. They run an NGO called Dakhal, means intervention. This is a graffiti on one of the university campus. It says, Brahmin, your grave will be dug in the land of BHU, Banaras University. Brahmins are the higher caste in India. They are currently in power and basically they call the shots in everything. Also in university, caste play a very important role. The students are basically discriminated on the basis of their caste. So untouchable students, they always face problem, harassment from them. So this is the graffiti, this is the act of underground student group. Okay, so this is a picture. We can see there has been some protest against the killing of rationalist, academics, journalists. And last but not the least, now what we see a Uniting India March, which is covering 3,500 kilometers. This march is organized by the Secular Congress Party under Rahul Gandhi to unite India against hate and division and to connect it's an effort to promote unity in diversity. Not even a Mahatma Gandhi has covered such a long distance. This India March has been receiving a wonderful response from people, and by this way Congress is also trying to reinventing itself and becoming more closer to the people and shattering its elite image. So we can see there is still hope. So what I can say, if the resistance continues, maybe because of a dwindling economic situation and political economic unrest, there might be a change. However, if Hindutva populism continue for long, India may disintegrate and may become a mirror image of Pakistan, like Mr. Jafar, let's say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amit. Now, Cristiano Gianola.
So while I open the presentation, let me thank Bruno Sena Martins for organizing this panel, Amit Singh for sharing the panel with me, and of course Professor Boaventura de Sousa Santos for being the discussant. So I'm going to make a presentation which is of a theoretical kind, and I'm happy to do this after Amit's presentation because I hope that what I'm going to say is going to match with what he has shown just now. This presentation is also part of the UNpacking project that Bruno mentioned. This is the project in a slide. So it's a cooperation between SESH and Center for Research in Neuropsychology and Cognitive and Behavioral Intervention. That is a center of the Faculty of Psychology and Education here at the University of Coimbra. You see it's an interdisciplinary team. Our central focus is on emotion narratives. I'm going to explain what we think they are. This is a concept that we are trying to found, to ground in theory. And we want to understand how emotion narratives enable us to understand the way political phenomena, especially populist parties, to mobilize people, so to impact in political behavior. You can see the main research questions. As you can see, they are both theoretical but also empirical, and we are also trying to put forward methodology to study emotion narratives, entering therefore in a very interdisciplinary field. And the presentation of today is going to be very much based on social psychology. You see, we adopt mixed methods for data collection and analysis, and then we compare parties in Portugal and Italy. Our website is about to be launched in a few days, so the website will be unpop.sesh/UCPT. So the presentation will focus on identity formation, on intergroup polarization, intergroup emotions, and finally on emotion narratives. There is another topic which is cross-cutting the presentation together with emotion narratives, which is political mythologies. I will also come to the definition, I hope, at the end of the presentation. You called me 5 minutes before the end, right?
Yes, I will.
That's great. This is therefore what I'm going to try to do during this presentation, starting from the fact that populism is our object of study, but we also have, as Amita said, we have to distinguish populism from the far right, the extreme right, whatever right movements we want to study. They are not necessarily the same, and also from nationalism and chauvinism. Sometimes all these factors are together in phenomena, in political phenomena, but not always. And what we want to understand is the impact that emotion have in the identity formation within these political phenomena. We hypothesize that populist and nationalist political phenomena impact on political behavior precisely because they have mastered the way emotions work in politics. And so therefore I asked them why this happened, how, where it happened, and what lessons for democratic theory. I have some proposed responses to these questions in my last slide, and hopefully they will also be useful for the debate. So to start with the definition of how collective identities are produced in populism, this is very well known in the literature on populism, and it is also all the time more emerging as, you know, reformulation or reappropriation of Ernesto Laclau's theory on equivalence and difference, where equivalence is produced to create what in political psychology is called the in-group, and the out-group, that is produced by the logic of difference, differentiating us from them. So this is very well known. Now I try to sketch out a few characteristics that you see on the slide to define what is the in-group and to define what is the out-group in general. However, we have to understand that different populist movements certainly have different outgroups. For instance, minorities are not the target of left-wing populist movements generally, but they are normally the target of right-wing populist movements. So the fact that other groups exist depends on which kind of orientation the movement has. For sure, there is the elite. That is the main characteristic of populism, even if we go back to the most used definition by Casmudde, and the fact that essentially populism is a thin ideology that divides the corrupt elite from the homogeneous people that hold sovereignty in a democratic context. So I think that the identity formation in populist movement is created through three, let's call them moments, that are based on an ongoing process. I think the process that is created, you see it's circular, so you will not find these three moments separated in the narrative of these parties, but you will find always them together. And the narrative, I frame it into what I call political mythology, and as I said, I will come to that later. But mainly, this is where these parties define who we are as an in-group, like eventually as the people, and then what do we have, so normally touching on socio-economic context, and what we deserve, so what we are looking forward to. And generally, this is created through a reading of reality which is extremely polarized through the sense of crisis. We are in a crisis because generally, as Amit has explained earlier on, we were so good in the past, and now we have lost that. So in that sense, Amit spoke about ontological insecurity, and I think it makes sense. But also, it identifies dispossession as the cause of this crisis, which is then, we will see, related to the outgroups. And this leads to the loss of social status and harmony within the in-group. The in-group is worsened by the situation of crisis due to this process of dispossession that has been perpetrated throughout history, and especially recent history. And then what is proposed is to through the polarization between us and them, us, the people, we want to restore what we have lost. They have led us to the crisis, so we create something new. And this identity is what Laclau's called the empty signifier, because it doesn't identify any specific social group, but it identifies all of them together without them sharing any a strong demand, or whether sharing a socio-political identity. And these would lead to restoration. So if we think of the in-group and out-group, these slides I use these slides to give a sketched idea, of course, much schematic idea of what I think when I refer to elites, and different parties refer to different kinds of elites. This is very much dependent on the context. And then minorities. As I said, whereas some elites, especially the economic elites, are central for any kind of populism, or sorry, for all the kind of populism, other kinds of elites, like the political elite and cultural elite, may be specific of the right-wing populists. We here talking about cultural Marxism. This is an example of, this is declinated into the language. And the political elite, it always depends whether the populist phenomenon is in power or not. Because if they are in power, generally they don't produce anti-elitism within the country, but they still produce anti-elitism, for instance, with the European Union in the case of Hungary. And that is understood especially as economic elite related to, big capital and so on. Minorities, I sketched here out some of those that exist, but it is not intended to be limited to this. Indeed, other kind of identities related to gender, for instance, are also part of the outgroups, generally. So if we want to summarize and sketch very easily, but of course, too schematically the difference, I would say that populist mobilization on the left is specifically targeting economic inequalities, while on the right it is based on a cultural identity, where there is a primacy of shared values related to the past, and therefore traditions, generally also related to a strong sense of the nation, the patriots, and also what is related to the way this is narrated in the public. So toponomasty and the heritage. I mean, it has shown how Modi is changing even the narrative in the landscape of India through changing statues, name of places, name of streets, and so on. I base this the approach to the emotion narrative on intergroup emotion theory, which very briefly sketched out in this slide, and it claims that social emotions are distinct from individual emotions, so that we have to study them separately than from what we do with individual emotion, although, I mean, the way the individual feels about them can be approached at the same way, but the origin of them is different. In fact, intergroup emotions emerge in the social identification and differentiation process. Identification with the in-group and differentiation with the out-group. Social psychology does not refer this theory to populism, but as you can see, there is a very evident merge between the two. Group identity becomes part of one's individual identity. So at some point, the individual feels to be the group, and when the group is attacked, the individual is also attacked. This explains also the emotional reactions individuals have in the public confrontations, for instance, or in the social networks, even when they are, let's say, playing alone at home or wherever they are. Therefore, in-group emotions are self-emotions. It doesn't matter if they are related to them personally or to the group as a whole. Even their group member can embody the emotion of the group as if he or she would be the leader of the group. Therefore, there is a depersonalization of the individual identity. This means that the individual acts because he or she is part of the group, and not because he or she necessarily would think to act in that way regardless of this identification process. And vice versa as well. So these intergroup emotions define how the individuals feel within the group, so in the in-group, and also how they relate with the out-groups. And we are going to show, I'm going to show you what I think are the main emotions that are mobilized by them. So we have certainly negative emotions, and the literature on populism has increasingly studied and targeted these emotions. Maybe these are especially fear and anger and resentment are the most studied in the recent years. I think anxiety is very important, and you will see later why. So I would summarize, of course, in these 4 areas of the what we call emotion, how populism mobilizes people. But then we should also consider that these 4 emotions, and I think Amit has explained precisely how they do that. Then we have positive emotions as well. And here I want to complexify a little, trying to make a connection between the two. So we have security, pride, hope, and interest. Again, interest is something that the literature misses to focus on. I think it's something that we are bringing into the debate. And based on the affective intelligence theory, I will show you later. And you will see, you can see how the search for security is something that attaches people to populism or to populist phenomena, which in their narrative that you have just listened to in Amit's presentation, you see the need for law and order is justified, and even embodied by the people lynching is the most plastic representation of that. Of course, there you have Islamophobia as the main phobia that is narrated within in the nationalism at the moment, but you have a number of outgroups, and for each one of them there will be a certain fear that is then translated into security, because when you identify someone that is dangerous for you and someone else is telling you that is going to protect, then of course by following the guy that is going to protect you, then of course you feel secure. But then right-wing populism especially puts much emphasis on pride, you know. Pride means, of course, attachment to the values we have been talking about, and also to tradition, to religion. But that also means recognition, means belonging in the in-group, of course, no matter how exclusionary the in-group is. And it produces identification, especially with the leader and the party. Then it produces hope for change. It's a change related to status quo, which is narrated in the way we have seen, and of course the hope is for the restoration of an order that is missed. This is in the case of India. I'm curious, I know there are many Brazilians. I'm not sure how much this applies to India, to Brazil at the same way, for instance, in Bolsonaro's narrative. But of course this restoration is exclusionary because it's related to the in-group, so it's only to the ethically bound community. and where there is a sense of justice that is limited within. And it creates trust. This hope creates trust for the leader. And finally, interest. Interest, I think it's very important because it, of course, is based on the fact that as much as a story is being told, the more people are looking for information about that story. So this brings also, you know, what are called the echo chambers, those places where people can find information they are looking for, they are raised interest for, and that then leads to, you know, truth and untruth, fake news or misinformation, disinformation, and different or parallel channels of information. And of course, this is very much related to the internet and the use in relation to politics. So we see that there is, if we want, I wouldn't say that it's so strict, so direct. I really don't like to use emotion labels like the ones you see in the screen, but we have to interact with each other. How can I explain you an emotion by describing it? Therefore, at the moment, I have no better way to do that using the names that we generally use for them, but I'm not pretending that each one understands and feels fear the same way. So let's assume this is a generalization, and also it's a generalization that from fear you have security, from anger, identification, from anxiety, interest, and from resentment, hope. What is important is that you have a set of negative emotions that generally produce positive emotion. I'm not sure that this is also only exclusive of the right. I think this is a political phenomenon which applies to all formations. So what we see, and I'm starting to outline the emotion narrative here. You see that narratives, I mean, emotions are related to narrative and are collective, because discrete emotions alone do not explain how this party can gain support and impact on political behavior. Nor individual emotion would do that. We see that this is a social process, and that's why social psychology seems to be fruitful. As I mentioned earlier, so individuals see the group as themselves. So this is precisely a social identification process, which turns the collective into the personal. And creates the logic of difference and equivalence as specified before. This is also declined in specific contexts towards specific outgroups, and these outgroups can change along the time. For instance, when you don't have much immigration, migrants might not be the main target of extreme right narrative, but other internal minorities group can be. These are what we could call functional needs. They are not foundational needs, they are functional needs. They are declined in a specific context. And then, I mentioned earlier the affective intelligence theory. I want to sketch here why it is important. It is based on the neurosciences. You see a book there, which is one of the books that work on this, but you have many articles as well. And this theory is based on two affective preconscious systems that lead to decision making. So, George Marcus and colleagues believe that the human takes decision based on these two systems, the disposition system and the surveillance system. The disposition system is at play constantly in our daily life, and it gives us feedbacks of reward or punishment to guide us towards taking decision based on routines and habits. So how is it reward and punishment provided to us is through enthusiasm for reward and aversion for punishment. When something goes wrong, or there are new information, or there is something unexpected in our routine, then the surveillance system is activated through anxiety. So you see why anxiety is so important, regardless of the fact that, again, I don't want to speak on labels of emotions, but the anxiety here it's an alarm to the disposition system that activates the surveillance system, where then fear and interest, or one of them, lead to find out a solution for the unexpected situation that we are living, regardless of whether individual or as a group. And so action are taken to overcome this situation in order to create a new routine and come back to the disposition system. I find this interesting because that points out to the center, as you can see, to interest as an emotion that is very much below the radar of populist scholars. So, emotion narrative, I give you my definition. I've been presenting this already. So, it's a distinct account of a range of emotions, both positive and negatives, that entangle social and political groups, providing identification, idealization, and differentiation. They are based on the understanding that social and political aggregation is produced through rational and emotional signification that defines the relationship between the in-group, us, and the out-groups, them. The emotion narrative highlights the existence of the interconnectedness of various emotions in specific process of social, political idealization, identification, and differentiation, assuming that it is produced by a framing story that is dynamic in itself. So these narratives are not static, they are a process, they are processes. And political mythology, I take this from the literature, and mainly they are discursive constructions that create and enforce social and political identities, operationalized to generate and strengthen acceptability for political aggregation and representation. As opposed to theoretical constructions, they entail a strong relation with contingency, mobilize emotion, and facilitate popular understanding and identification. They are dynamic, again they are processes. The constituted myths can be reframed, but the foundational myths generally are more slow to change than myths that are contextual, and they are attenuated or recreative, and the narrative that connects them change for political purposes. Political mythologies are prone to be re-engineered or reorganized according to the different needs in specific socio-political context and in different times. I think I am almost over my time. I hope I have time just to leave this slide on the screen in order to support the debate after the discussion by Professor Boaventura. So why it happened? I think that there is an underestimation of the value of mythology, narrative, and emotions in politics. How it happened? There is the excess of representation in democracy. There is a verb missing there. Undermines the internal energy by abating civil society imagination and commitment. There is a kind of commodification of politics. This is quite mainstream, as we have been discussing several times. But there is also a political inability to undermine the roots of social inequalities and oppression. So if I think of Brazil now, I think that may be one of the causes of extreme right populism. And where it happens, where we see that it's in all the continents, least where political prophecy, which includes imagination and the possibility to act, is under control of law and order. But even there, we see that movements are emerging. I'm thinking of Iran and China at the moment. And we will see whether they will be able to organize as a socio-political identity, create an empty signifier, and put forward a populist mobilization. So what is needed? What are the lessons for democracy? I think imagination. I think that you don't see the, imagination, narrative, and emotions are fundamental for social identity and change. So I think I can leave it at it. And
thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you here. We are resuming our presential activities, and I missed a lot in the pandemic that we couldn't meet the faces. We couldn't go out for dinner and drink and have our celebrations of collective life, which I think is very important for this center. I'm very, very proud of my two younger colleagues. They just presented their papers, and they are working papers on their PhD projects. So in the case of Cristiano, it's an advanced project that he's engaged in. We are funded by the European Union, and I'm very glad that we are here to be able to discuss. And as usual in this center, I think we discuss very vividly, very frankly, our differences, our similarities, and that's the way we have to proceed and to progress in our work. Well, I approach these two studies from the perspective of the critical theory I've been putting forward. And I've been trying, particularly in the last 15 years, to propose a non-Eurocentric critical theory, which I've been calling the epistemology of the South. It is from that perspective that I analyze the two papers that we have before us. And of course, this idea of a non-Eurocentric critical theory should not lead us astray and think that there is nothing to do with the Eurocentric critical theory. I think that we are here to build new ideas on the base of old ideas. I've never, in the epistemology of the South, we don't create upon the ruins of anything. We create with the ruins and we progress with them. So, for instance, Marxism is very important for me. I would say that Marxism today is a Eurocentric in general, Eurocentric critical theory. But that has been very influential in my own development, and I stick to it because I include it in a broader framework in which Marxism, of course, is a part. Well, I think looking at these papers from the perspective, a critical perspective, two things emerge. First, why are we studying these things today? Why this populism, nationalism, and in general extreme right, even though in Cristiano Giannoli you can see that there is a kind of an equivalence between left populism and right populism. I'm going to address that later on. But in general, all these issues have become very important in recent years, and basically because of the growth of extreme right. It's a global growth. And I think that we should address the reasons why in different parts of the world, in India, in Brazil, in Europe, in many countries in Africa, in the United States, we see the growth of extreme right politics that leads into these problems. Well, I have been trying to show that this is the second phase of the neoliberal version of capitalism that started to become a global version of capitalism by the 1980s of the previous century. And in fact, the neoliberalism based on the idea of the shrinking of the state, of against fiscal policies and taxes for the rich, the liberalization, privatization, shrinking the state. The state is corrupt, the state is inefficient, the markets are the great rationales rationalizer of social life, and everything should, as much as possible, to be privatized. Well, the first phase of neoliberalism is a global version of capitalism. We should address another question, which I'm not going to address here, is why neoliberalism came in now. Well, we have tried before. In fact, it started in Latin America in 1973 with Pinochet in Chile, and then developed all over the world in a sense. Before that was a theory, a minority theory in economics, right? Well, I think the first phase was characterized by the critique of social and political rights, social and economic rights that have been embedded in social democracy and liberal democracy in general, the social policies, public health, public education, public system of pensions, and social security. All these public services were considered to be damaging the performance of the economy, so we should privatize them. Everything that is susceptible of being profitable should be privatized. So education is profitable, health is profitable, should be privatized. So that was the critique of social democracy that increased immensely after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1991. The process 1989, 1991. And I think that we are addressing a second phase. This phase is almost complete. In fact, social democracy is in crisis everywhere, and social rights, in fact, and economic rights have been eroded in many countries. In fact, very often we say that for the people that are resisting against domination, which is my perspective, in fact, we are in a period of defensive struggles. If you notice about the social movements with which I interact, they are not fighting for new rights. They are fighting to defend the rights they already had and are losing. So it's very defensive, both in labor rights, in education rights, social rights, economic rights, and so on. So we are in a period of defensive struggles, and that's why I think that is the first phase of neoliberalism. Then there is a second phase, and the second phase is what we are entering now. What we have been there for almost 6 or 5 years is that neoliberalism is not enough now to criticize social and economic rights. It's addressing the core of liberal democracy, civic and political rights, free expression, freedom of parties, the liberal system of politics. All of it is under attack by the extreme right. Why are they doing that? Why they are moving from the critique against social rights to the critique of individual political civic rights? Well, if we read closely the documents that come from the CIA, from the International Monetary Fund, these are documents that all of us in the critical theory should be reading very closely. They say that, particularly after the pandemic, we are going to witness social unrest everywhere in the world. Because there was an emergency, there was a crisis. The social crisis is the pandemic after the crisis, the financial crisis of 2008, and therefore it is predicted that we are going to have strong periods of very acute social resistance, which has to be fought against. And the states have no other weapons to fight against those under the neoliberal creed other than repressive reactions. And the repression has to be very drastic and probably is not compatible with democracy. So we are going to have more emergency states, states of siege, situations of exceptional behavior that leads to more autocratic systems. And therefore, the idea that democracy cannot be relied on to resist against social unrest that is coming. I think that's the large picture that probably we are not aware of, but the people that are in charge of the system are of course thinking about that. How they are going to control the masses if they just start resisting everywhere against this unprecedented concentration of wealth, in which the 8 richest people in the world have as much wealth as the half of the world population, half of the world population, 3.5 million people. So this is really outrageous. It's a monstrosity. Should it be accepted as a banality? Well, I think they really think that probably we need more muscle on the part of the repressive state to fight against this, in my view. This is at least one of the reasons why we have the growth of extreme right. And of course it's of much concern to people that are really struggling for democracy, particularly in countries like Portugal or Brazil, in which democracy is still a minority period in their histories, because most of their histories have been under dictatorship, not democracy. So democracy are not really stabilized in our world today. And if they think they are, well, that is a danger. So I think what I see here is that this extreme right is using lots of systems and tactics, and some of them are very clear in these papers that they are presenting. The first one is Amit, and concerning Amit's paper and Cristiano, we can see already two styles of differences. Cristiano in his presentation is very much concerned about analytical precision about the different concepts or different distinctions. Amit is much more concerned about the social dynamics of things. I think, in fact, we need some analytical precision, because we talk about nationalism, we talk about populism, we talk about populist nationalism, we talk about nationalistic populism. What is this? Well, in my view, populism is a system in which the main actors are the people, defined in all vagueness, and the leader. That is to say, populism for me is a political system in which the mediation of the political system, that is to say, the parties, the institutions, etc., don't count anymore. What counts above all is the leader and the people. This is, for me, is the way I conceive of populism. Nationalism is a different thing. Nationalism has two roots, and they are very different with the same name. One is the civic nation. The civic nation is the nation of the people that are bound within the same geopolitical boundaries. That is to say, all of us are Portuguese, all of us are Brazilians, all of us are Indians, all of us are Italians, because we are citizens, or we live in this geopolitical space. We call it the civic nation. The other is the concept of ethno-cultural nation. That's the concept that indigenous people use to define, for instance, their identity. They are their nations, the Cherokee nation, the Aymara, the Quechua nation. They don't call themselves in Latin America, but they could. The nation as a kind of a common belongingness, a kind of the same ethno-cultural roots. Well, these two nationalisms are very different, of course. And in fact, when civic nationalism emerges, particularly in Europe, from the 17th century onwards, it is trying to debunk, to eliminate ethno-cultural nationalism. The problem is that civic nation very often is based on the ethno-cultural nation. Not always, but sometimes. What Modi is doing is to implant into a civic nation superimpose the concept of ethno-cultural nation. That is to say, there is the Indian nation, the Kandyan nation, so to say, and now the Modi nation is the Hindu nation. So upon a civic concept, we implant an ethno-cultural concept of nation. And these two concepts have been fighting each other for a long time. And there is a dynamics that we should understand. So it is important to see what we are talking about. And in this perspective, we should also be precise how we analyze this phenomenon from a critical perspective. That is to say, a perspective that is not satisfied with the current state of affairs and thinks that our societies are unjust, unequal, and fair, and should be, it could be better. It's not a fatality, all this concentration of wealth all this misery side by side with ostentations, and which are almost scandalous. The idea that we could have a better society, actually. The idea of liberation, the idea of emancipation, and so on. It is very important for us to distinguish between objectivity and neutrality. We are objective in our analysis. That's why we are here. We are studying methodologies, we are studying concepts, we are trying to be precise, but we are not neutral. Which side are we on? We are on the side of the extreme right forces, or the anti-democratic forces, or are on the side of democratic forces? Well, I have no doubt. I am at least, and I think most of you are, and I would desire all of you are, on the side of democratic theory, of the counter or anti-extreme right forces. Well, if this is so, then how do we really analyze this phenomenon? With Amit's paper, I have almost no difficulty, because I think I see there a very good analysis of Indutva and how this extreme right perspective moves from Gujarat in the beginning of the millennium, and then becomes a kind of a national ideology, an hegemonic ideology, and it's part of the current toward extreme right. We have to remember that Modi for a while was forbidden to enter the United States as a terrorist because of the Gujarat's massacres of the Muslims, and because of the gross violation of human rights. But then, as usual in the United States, it becomes useful to use Modi in the strategy against India, against China, and so on. And all of a sudden, Modi is welcomed in the United States, and everything is forgotten about him. And now Biden is, pleading to India to be more aggressive against Russia and against China, and so on. So it's the usual geopolitics of the United States. But you can see that in this case, Amit is analyzing the rise of Modi and analyzing the resistance against it. So the critical approach demands that we also put in the picture the resistance. Because in fact the resistance always exists. From the epistemology of the South perspective, which as you know is this clear to analyze knowledge is born in struggle against domination, be it capitalism, colonialism and patriarchy, I think that it's very important to say that all these phenomena, no matter how powerful they are, they need resistance. How this resistance takes place. So I think that Amit is doing that, and is doing that fine. Because I think I've been reading a lot, because I like to honor always my younger colleagues, and both Amit and Cristiano have been forcing me in most recent days to study a lot about their topics. And it is interesting, Amit, that India Forum just recently published a very interesting paper, which I would advise you to read. Is also, if you haven't read it already, is about the paradoxic character of Indian democracy. But because we see India is a continent, is a subcontinent, it's vast, like Brazil. So we see lots of interesting initiatives, democratic initiatives emerging in India, in the different states, in different localities, participatory, liberal, even, electoral initiatives in democracy. And at the same time, at the central level, we see this rise in the polarization conducted by Narendra Modi. It is a kind of a paradox that there is like a very living type of democratic experiences in many states of India, to rely on that paper, of course, and the constraints from the center. Then it's very important to see the role of the institutions, the courts, for instance. But we can see, as Amit is trying to convey to us, and does that very well, is the role of the people. I mean, the farmers' protests, as you have seen here, they took place during the pandemic. It's not before or after. It was during the pandemic. For here, this is absolutely impossible to understand for a Westerner. For someone from the Northern Hemisphere. How could these farmers stay there for so long? in the midst of the pandemic. Moreover, they succeeded. The laws were overturned because of their resistance. I mean, this is remarkable. The role of women. That many people like to see that feminism was born in the north and so on. But you can see all these feminist protagonism in India today. As you can see that the Mozambican parliament has many more women than the Portuguese parliament, which is a very tiny minority, while in Mozambique is almost parity now. So you can see all these important factors that call for us to pay attention to the resistances. And also to see the similarities, because to conduct social sciences is to do comparisons. Because when Amit was discussing, I was thinking all the time about a situation in which we had, here in Europe, very close home, we have a region of Europe in which the conviviality among different religions was very well, was very peaceful, where the intermarriage between Muslims and Christians, Orthodox and Catholic was prevalent in the Balkans. That was a marvelous intermarriage system there. All of a sudden, because of local errors and because of external forces, all the Yugoslavia basically is destroyed. And all of a sudden we have all these fights, we have the massacres, we have Srebrenica, we have all the massacres against Muslims, against Christians, the polarization. So religion is a good thing. The political religion, the political use of religion is awful. And this polarization is just what is the perversion. For us here at SENS, it's very important to understand polarization because it's the other side of diversity. We have been struggling for diversity. Different dominations. We don't say capitalism. We say capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy. So that the struggles against capitalism are as visible as the struggles against racism, against sexism. Diversity. But diversity has this perverse effect. If the political leaders use it in the wrong ways, they transform it in polarization, us and them. And all of a sudden, Muslims and Christians that lived in the Balkans all of a sudden are polarized, and you have all this infighting, and the situation is not controlled. I was recently in Macedonia and could see how these people have been in conviviality for such a long time, and all of a sudden, the enemies are there, the us and them, as Cristiano was telling us. So I think that we have to understand the political mobilization of difference can lead to identitarian ghettos, as today often it leads to, into extreme right politics. So I think this is one of the lessons that we should bear in mind. Well, coming to Cristiano's paper, I have more difficulty in analyzing Cristiano's paper from a critical perspective, because I think it is not his fault. I know Cristiano for a long time. It is the fault of the approach that he's using. I have nothing against social psychology. I myself, I'm now writing about the mental health in our current issue and current times. And I think that I have to interact. Last week I was in Rio de Janeiro discussing with psychoanalysts the questions of mental health and sociology. Now, I really praise all the social psychologists, psychiatrists, and psychoanalysts. The social psychologists a very inherent difficulty in building critical approaches to it. So we try to see behaviors and patterns of behavior in a kind of a neutral, objective and neutral way. And I see here that Cristiano, for instance, equates left populism and right populism. I didn't do that. Or if I would do that, I would specify. What is left populism? Because if you look at the newspapers today, you see very often that if a party promotes social policies, public health, public education, is considered populist by the extreme right, by the right. The Workers' Party now in Brazil, the Lula's party, is fighting the insult, in fact, that they are populist because they want to bring back social policies. because everything that is social policies is considered populist. This is not populism. This is not populism. And much less left populism. Left populism is when the leader, one leader, assumes the paper, the role and protagonism of the only provider of those goods. Or as I would say that Cuba, during a certain period, in particular under Fidel, was a period of left populism. We could say that. We could also say that Venezuela, during the period of Chavez, particularly the first Chavez, in fact, could be considered populist because all of a sudden the institutions, the mediations in Venezuelan society disappeared and was just the leader and the people. Well, I don't see that in Brazil it is the case because I think there are parties and the parties are there and the institutions and Supreme Court and other courts and so on, institutions are there on the border of chaos, in fact, because the coup is very close to be, is not eliminated at all at this point. I just came back from there and I can tell you that I'm very worried about the near future of Brazil before the inauguration of Lula and probably after. Because there are people that are really engaged in making even the inauguration on 1st of January impossible. And they are working underground on that. And we have now is not so underground because the news are coming out. We can discuss that later on in the debate. So what I think is that analyzing emotions is very important. But why it is important? It's only at the end that Christian, almost as an afterthought, says, what is the contribution of this for democratic theory? During his presentation, I didn't see anything that could say that in fact is trying to strengthen democratic theory. Because the only way of a critical theory can analyze a phenomenon is not to see the fate of democracy, is to strengthen democracy, to see the risks. The risks are the emotions. They are not the risks. For those that have been reading my work, they can say our emotions are important. For instance, in the end of Cognitive Empire, I dedicate a full chapter on the warm reason, as I call the warm reason, a raison quente. What is a warm reason? Is precisely the idea that I have never seen anyone fighting for social justice out of exclusively rational reasons. That is to say, I decided to be against this oppression, against dictatorship, against the inequality, because rationally I think it's very important. No, we never do that. We fight against injustice if there is a gut reaction, an emotion, an indignation, sometimes anger. I was yesterday in Oporto discussing the dear people that work with me for a long time, the rappers in Brazil and other countries. And now Mano Brown, the Brazilians here know what I'm talking about, from Racionais MCs, how the Mano Brown said, but audio, Raiva is positive for us. I mean, the people that were living in the periphery in the 2000, the rage they had, it was very important because there was mobilizing for the struggle. So I cannot say that emotions are wrong. What I have to analyze is what for are using the emotions. Well, in order to analyze why I'm interested in this, Christian has been helping me a lot because I would say that sometimes when you read theories for a long time, as I have been doing, sometimes we fall into traps and we don't know our traps. For instance, the liberal theory always tried us to believe, particularly economic theory, but also political theory, rational choice, begin with, that we decide upon rational reasons. That is, we calculate. Homo economics, what is homo economics? Is a guy that is rational enough to see what are the demands, what are the supply, what are the prices, and he chooses among the best possibilities, always. Well, this is one side of theory, because if you look back and you go through the theories, you can see the fathers, there were no mothers in this theory actually, the fathers of this theory, all of them have been dealing with emotions, with passions. For instance, if you read Leviathan by Hobbes, I mean, Hobbes is about passions. It's about fear. The fear of the people that lead to the leader. It's not about rationality. If you go back and read Thucydides, the history of the Peloponnese, what does Thucydides says? He says that people are run by greed, by honor, and by fear. So these are emotions. Well, emotions are very useful, but I want to analyze what kinds of emotions are being promoted by the extreme right. What are emotions that are really being? Why? Because we see that today are these global networks, redes sociais. The social networks are being used much more effectively by the extreme right, far right, as you want to call it, with precise psychological analysis of these emotions, of these types of emotions. I've been reading about that. For example, the distinction between discrete emotions and conglomeration of emotions. For example, the difference between anger and enthusiasm. Because anger and enthusiasm, both of them, create the disposition, not surveillance. So the two concepts. Disposition is a propensity to act, to participate. While anxiety and fear probably create the propensity to surveillance, to fatality, to not participate, to avoid, to withdraw, so to say, abstention sometimes in politics, right? So what they are doing, and now I could have the key, why they are emphasizing so much anger at this point. And I go back to the social psychology texts, and what tell me? Anger is the discrete emotion that correlates more positively with participation in politics. Anger, raiva, cólera, ira. That would be the translation into Portuguese, right? It's not enthusiasm, it's rage, anger. And what these studies are telling us is a second thing, is that it mobilizes for participation, but makes people indifferent to the nature, the quality of the information. That is to say, the reliability of information. That is to say, they tend to trust fake news, basically. That's what they say, right? Even though they don't use this word. It's not inside social psychology. They have this idea that they don't really participate. The concept that they use most common is they are eager to participate, but not thoughtful participation. That is to say, rational participation, based on reliable information. Well, what I see these days is precisely this. How people, I was discussing with people, you can't imagine, in Brazil recently, that believe, in fact, that the earth is a straight, out to plane, not round.
Flat.
Huh?
Flat. Flat.
Right, flat. Yeah, I'm sorry. I hate so much the concept that I will forget about it. Well, it is very, very curious to see the reasons why they say that. Because they use our arguments against us. Have you ever seen the except from afar, who tells you that image is, the blue coming from the satellites, our imaging? Well, it is true that we never went to the end of the world and then there is an abyss. That's our argument. If it is flat, just go there and then you fall into the abyss. But you have never demonstrated me the opposite. So this idea is very powerful among people because it's just a caricature. Because many of the fake news are not that radical, are much less radical. So I think that we have a perspective, a problem here, is that what for this project? What is the use of this project? How they organize this project in such a way that I minimize the ways in which it can be used by extreme right forces to say, well, look at that project, interesting project. He's telling us how we should proceed. This is not really trivial. You know probably the history of these two marvelous, wonderful Chilean researchers. I always mention this case because many people don't know it, except my friends here at FES. There's eye researchers in ophthalmology in Chile that analyzed for years the eye of the mosca, the fly, the eye of the flies. And all of a sudden, all their studies were used to develop the smart bombs. Because the smart bombs have an eye like the fly. So they use the targets, so that's why the bomb and the missiles can go one way or the other. They don't go straight. One of the guys went crazy, really mad, because he couldn't believe that such a good research could be used for such awful purposes. We also know the case of the atomic physics and what happened to the physicists that developed the atomic bomb. Many of them, in fact, had to be cared about for the rest of their lives because they couldn't live with the consequences. So I think that in psychology, in these kinds of studies, it's very important to analyze the emotions because it is not only by rationality that people behave in our world. This is absolutely clear. For a long time, both in the critical theory and in the conventional theory, we believed that people were rational, but there were different reasons. And that's why we differ. Different theories and different reasons. But now we see that there are not reasons, are emotions that can paralyze us, can mobilize us. Because after all, going back to our previous analysis, what were the revolutionaries? Were these people were really just rational people, the revolutionaries? For instance, go back and try to analyze this. It's fabulous, our world today, to analyze this. I advise you to read the memoir of the great revolutionary, because it didn't fit neither in the communists or the anarchists and so on. It's almost unknown for many people. His name is Victor Serge. If you analyze the memoirs of this young fellow, of Belgian origin, his parents were communists from Russia, and Victor Serge, who died in exile in Mexico in 1945 or something, he was in Russia during all this period of the Soviet Union, the beginning of the revolution. Read the memoirs and look what are the emotions of the revolutionaries. In the midst of the worst possible conditions there, you have a non-romantic view of the revolution. Not the romantic view that we get revolutionaries. You see the anxieties. You can see how Mayakovsky could develop, but how the realities were different. They were different emotions. Because they believed that they were creating a new man. A new world was a new man, they would say, not a new person as you'd say today. Homem novo. Homem novo would be the revolutionary person that does not look individually, looks collectively. And that's why he's ready for sacrifices, because in the name of something that will be a better future for everyone. Who is ready to do this today? We are not, in most cases. Are we too individualistic? Well, it's another emotion, it's another way of looking at the world. But if you are more individualistic, in fact, what is entrepreneurship? Which is, being preached everywhere in our schools and our universities. It has to be your own slave or your own master, basically the same thing, quite frankly. Because if you succeed, you may be a master, but if you don't succeed, you'll be a slave. They never say that most people fail, therefore most people are slaves, auto-slaves or self-slaves, not self-masters. So different contexts promote different emotions. What are the emotions that are being promoted these days? Why fear, hunger, anxiety, and enthusiasm? Enthusiasm is put there, but usually in these studies, enthusiasm comes at the end, is when the hunger develops participation and they go for the struggle, killing the other with enthusiasm. Hate speech creates the enthusiasm to liquidate the other, to kill the other. Some people have seen a member of the parliament, Zambelli in Brazil recently, pointing a gun to a guy and chasing the guy in the street to kill him. Was this some theater thing or election? But nobody knows. But the guy could have been killed, right? Another guy tried to kill Cristina Kirchner in Argentina very recently. Didn't succeed. Was it a trick? Well, people say that really the guy wanted to kill her, but didn't manage to do so. What kind of enthusiasm takes someone, what kind of emotion that I can destroy the other? Because he's the them in such an extreme way. He doesn't belong to me. He's an animal, he's a savage, he's a usurper, he's a terrorist, he's a communist, he's whatever. He's subhuman. So for those that deal with my smells of the South, can see what I'm trying to get at. Extreme right is the promotion of the misaligned. The misaligned is growing, dividing humans from subhumans. And while we thought that initially that was colonialism linked to the color of the skin and the patriarchy, leading to referring to gender, would be the ontological degradations that create subhumanities. As I used to say, racialized bodies and sexualized bodies. That's where the misaligned. I think that today, and that's an hypothesis, I have to work more on this, but I'm offering it for them to develop if they want, is whether now the extreme right is developing in such a way that more people from one reason or the other, maybe the castes, maybe the Muslims, maybe leftist orientation, they are considered subhumans. It is true that in the caste system, of course, if you are Adivasi or Dalits, you are really close to be subhuman, treated like, in spite of the constitution. Right? So I think that misaligned is advanced. That's why I read theoretically these studies. Misaligned is advanced, and for those that know how I divide societies between those that are ruled by metropolitan, can I draw it on the we could see graphically, and this is my concluding remark to my dear friends and colleagues. How come? This is subversion, it says. How is it possible that in this seminar, a guy puts a book here on Jack Kerouac? Can you see the anger of Jack Kerouac? It's like Racionais, Mano Brown. Read Jack Kerouac, the Beat Generation in the United States. This guy is fabulous, great poet. And Jack exactly got on the road in the 70s, the hip generation or Beat generation. See how much anger there is, but against capitalism, against racism. These guys, on the road. That's the anger opposite the anger of the extreme right. That's, it was not by just you and you put it there. I know you. Okay. Well, dear friends, this is the abyssal line. I usually draw it. I don't know why I put on the vertical or horizontal. It could be both ways. In your work, you can use it different ways. And I say that here is the metropolitan. This is the abyssal line. This is the metropolitan sociability, and this is the colonial sociability. And during colonialism, historical colonialism, in today's societies are divided like this. And therefore, this society is protected by law, by democracy, by the rule of law, is run by the concepts of regulation and emancipation. This colonial sociability is not run by ideas of regulation or emancipation. It is run by the ideas of violence and appropriation. It's completely different. And if you look at that, and I always say the examples, I mention the examples that are close to me, as that famous among some of you, probably not all of you, I've repeated to my younger student from the West in Rio de Janeiro, black guy at university. Of course, he feels very well at the work because he's black, but everybody likes him, he's wonderful during the university's here. But when he leaves the university, crosses the Maracanã and goes to his favela, he's stopped by the police every 20 minutes to open backpack. Opens backpack and show the computer. And the police, yes, go on. 20 minutes later, the police, another policeman, asks him to open the backpack, and he opens again. And then the third time, when he's up to enter in the favela. And after the third time, the young guy asked the policeman, why are you doing this? Since I left work already 3 times, the police asked me to open the backpack. And the police tells him, there is nothing personal against you. Our protocol tells us, professional protocol, that in light of certain types of people, like colored, we have to do this. Institutional racism, that's what it is. What is my reading? This young guy lives here at West, but when he goes to the favela, he's crossing the abyssal line, he's being treated as subhuman by the police in the same society. So the abyssal line is an experience, everyday experience, like the woman that works in a restaurant, protected, even though discriminated probably, but protected by law. But when arrives at home, she may be assassinated by the partner. At that moment, or if she's in India, probably in the public transportation, very likely be a victim of sexual assault. And probably in Lisbon or here, I don't know. In Cidade Juarez, the possibility of being killed is very high. So she crosses this line. You see? So this idea for the extreme right is my reading is this. The extreme right seems the growth, the moving of the abyssal line in this direction. More people are fully unprotected, considered subhuman. Less people are being fully protected in our societies. This is the characteristic of a society in a period of defensive struggles, of reactionary and conservative thinking as a mainstream and not progressive thinking. Is the advance of the abyssal line in this direction. Less people protected, more people unprotected. And that's why many people, maybe one of the costs, workers. A worker with rights is here, not here. We always study that workers work with rights, labor rights. But if you eliminate the worker rights and everybody's Uber worker, or they are workers in the Bangladesh, women, then when they are 35 years of age, many of them are blind because of the intensity of sewing and the sewing machines in the textile, in the garment industry. Well, probably they are here, not there. You see? They have no rights. So that's why I see the promising of these studies. That will be my comment. Thank you very much.